Hello everyone, my name is Jay Macias. I am a doctoral student at Southeastern University where my focus of study is organizational leadership. In the last 2 years, I have studied the subject of learning organizations and the best practices to leading change. Today, I will take a few minutes to discuss a project I took on with my local church. Like many nonprofit organizations and local churches, Fishhawk Fellowship Church is struggling to maintain volunteers. But what makes Fishhawk Fellowship different? The Fishhawk Fellowship community is growing, and if God continues to bless the community, we anticipate a growth of about 104% in the next 5 years, which could lead to about 1,200 additional homes and 3,600 new residents. To meet the needs of the growing community, the visionary leadership of Fishhawk Fellowship have set out on a 3-year capital campaign to reach the community through a 7-day ministry, multi-purpose worship and recreation center that will target the community through sports evangelism. The problem and challenge the leadership of Fishhawk Fellowship is facing is not the raising of funds to build a new building, but rather the new and additional need of additional volunteers to support the expected growth in the church and its programs. This is the focus of the Practicum. The team working the project consists of both church staff and lay leaders. The overall leader and my mentor in this project is Pastor Daniel Butson. Pastor Daniel is overall responsible for the 3-year capital campaign. Pastor Tony Parker is the executive pastor and thus provides a holistic perspective on volunteer needs of the church. The lay leadership consists of Jim Young, who will oversee the long-term program implementation, Eric Schultz, who is a local business leader, and I, who am working as the program developer, applying many of the lessons and strategies I have learned in my doctoral studies. This presentation will only cover the highlights. Please review the strategic plan for much greater understanding on the program implementation and the steps. The first thing we did as a team was to conduct 4 focus groups with ministry leaders and a survey of current volunteers. We identified the following. First, Fishhawk volunteers fall into 4 general categories that support a broad range of church ministries. Level 1 is unpaid staff. Level 2 are lay ministry leaders. Level 3 are ministry volunteers. And Level 4 are occasional volunteers. Our focus of the program is on Level 2 and Level 3. Lay ministry leaders are those volunteers that are specific ministry actions. Examples include life group leaders, usher team leaders, parking ministry. We also want to focus on Level 3, which are ministry volunteers. These are the volunteers that are dependable and serving more than one church ministry. The team also looked at the demographics. We looked at gender. Females were the largest percentage at 62%, males were at 37%. We assessed the age of our volunteers, and the majority of volunteers fell between the ages of 23 and 41 at 41%. The second largest group at 32% were those between the ages of 42 and 45. We looked then at how many years in average our volunteers have been attending the church, and predominantly those that have been attending church for at least 1 to 3 years were the largest majority at 82%. We also took a look at the number of ministries. Currently at Fishhawk Fellowship, we have a total of 35 ministries. They range from teaching, first impression, leadership, sanctuary support, and church programs. Teaching include Bible studies, Awanas, and children's ministries. First impressions were those ministries that dealt with ushering, greeting, parking, and welcome desk. Leadership consisted of deacons, principal committees, pastoral councils, financial teams, and those type of organizations. And church programs consisted of those that essentially either worked in tech ministry, worship ministry, or at least working within the sanctuary itself. The total number of volunteers we had currently serving at Fishhawk Fellowship is 670 spread along those different ministries, with the largest being teaching and the second largest being first impressions. As you can see in the 2 pie charts, the largest amount of ministries is first impressions, and then the largest amount of volunteers fall within the teaching ministries and the first impressions at 42% for teachers and 35% for first impressions. After reviewing the data and speaking with the church leaders, the team identified 3 key findings. The first is that the current volunteer programs are not efficient and it will be further strained within the new sanctuary. The second key finding is that there are certain ministries, specifically those in the children's ministries, where we are currently at capacity. And the third finding is that absent volunteer program improvements, Fish Hawk Fellowship will have to employ additional workers to meet the growing needs. To address the challenge, the team focused on three things: the why, which is the vision, the what, which is the strategy, and the how, which is the mission. So first, let's talk a little bit about the vision. We established the vision as the need to first equip lifelong servants with a volunteer process that's effective, flexible, and scalable. The vision we want to create is that God has given us natural gifts and we will respect people's time as a valuable resource, and that we need to create a culture of ownership through service. The what is the strategy, which is to develop a program that will equip lifelong servants through a process to effectively recruit, onboard, and maintain volunteers by coming alongside ministries with coaches to implement these processes. We believe that this will lead to a culture in which volunteers are inspired, equipped, and led to become lifelong servants. The mission is the how we will implement the program. We see three goals. First is goal one, to recruit a steady flow of volunteers and reduce volunteer burnout. Goal two is to develop a program that grows volunteers from occasional servants to consistent active volunteers that transition into leaders of the organization. And goal three is to improve the volunteer experience by matching volunteers to tasks according to their gifts and providing a mechanism and platform for feedback and ownership and spiritual growth. The model will consist of three pillars. First is the recruit, second is onboard, and third is to maintain. The recruit will focus on promoting and matching volunteers based on gifts and available time to the needs of the church. The onboard pillar will focus on equipping the volunteer to ensure they are as prepared and as welcome to their ministry team. And last, and perhaps the most important, is to intentionally pour into our volunteers in order to create lifelong servants. Here are a couple of practical steps the team will follow. In the area of enhancing recruitment, we will leverage the church's quarterly Discover Fish Hawk Fellowship Church new member orientation. This is how we start educating and changing the culture. We also plan on working with our life group leaders to help the promotion of peer-to-peer recruitment. And lastly, as our focus groups and surveys showed, the Ask from the Pulpit remains a powerful tool for recruitment. To improve onboarding, we will work with the ministry leads to develop positions, one-pagers to ensure volunteers understand their position responsibilities. You can find a couple of these examples in the strategic plan. One of the areas that has been identified as troublesome to both ministry leads and volunteers is the extensive paperwork necessary before a volunteer placement. As such, the team is looking at ways to centralize and reduce the time it takes to complete background checks. To maintain and grow faithful servants, the team will start tracking volunteer hours to recognize our volunteers, but equally to reduce volunteer burnout. We will also work with our ministry leads to make sure that we develop personal growth opportunities for those volunteers that desire to grow in leadership roles. Lastly, we will conduct periodic surveys and town hall sessions with our volunteers to seek ways to improve our program. We have developed both immediate, which are 6 to 12 months, and long-term, which is 1 to 2 year goals. Goal 1, which is to recruit a steady flow of volunteers, we envision the immediate goal as ministries having adequate volunteers to meet weekly requirements with about 10 to 20% backups, while long-term is the recruitment of about 20% of new volunteers per quarter. For goal 2, which is to grow volunteers from occasional volunteers, which are level 4, to lay leaders, which are level 2 or level 3, we'll have the immediate goal of ministry leaders identifying personnel within their respective ministries. We're looking at about 10% to serve as coaches or other leadership positions, with a long-term goal of ministries actively tracking progress of volunteers from level 4 episodic volunteers to level 1 unpaid staff. And then level 3, which is the improvement of the volunteer experience, we will have the immediate goal of ministry leads identifying personal growth plans for those that desire them, with the long-term goal of Fish Hawk Fellowship demonstrating a culture of serving as a means of worship. I won't spend too much time on the SWOT analysis, but we did identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat areas for this program. We believe that our biggest opportunity is the growing community, and through a good promotion strategy, we feel that Generation X and millennials, which are heavy in our congregation, can be motivated to do more for His kingdom. Our biggest threat is that if we don't step off properly, we will be competing for the same number of volunteers in this effort, and this effort may be viewed as just another program demanding and drawing from the same people that we are trying to help. We realize that changing the culture will take time, so we will implement a 2-year strategy with 3 key steps. The first is a pilot program, which we've started in May and will carry out till about July. We have identified the ministry with the greatest need, and the goal of this action is to examine how this ministry can support and make necessary corrections prior to full implementation. We see the transition criteria for this step as the executive pastor approving any alterations for this ministry before we move on. The second pilot program will go from around August to about November. The purpose of this program is really to extend what we've done in the pilot 1 to all ministries, both for Saturday and Sunday services. Upon completion of the pilot 2 program, their serve team will meet with all the ministry leads and conduct a church-wide assessment to see how effective the ministry effort has been so far. We see the transition criteria for this as both a quantitative and qualitative demonstration to ensure that the program is actually working. Upon completion of Pilot 1 and Pilot 2, which we anticipate around January of 2018, we anticipate that the serve team will implement it fully across the church for about 2 years, and then we'll review the strategic plan's progress monthly and we'll update the plan quarterly. I believe this program will significantly impact not just by reducing the physical volunteer shortage we are currently experiencing and probably experiencing in the new building, but we also believe that this serve team's effort will change the culture in the Fish Hawk community. We will hope to have an army of servant leaders for His kingdom and His glory. Many of the steps and procedures that I followed during this program were based on my studies at Southeastern University, specifically ideas and concepts from these authors. If I could do this project over, I would have extended my research beyond just those that are currently volunteers to those that are not currently serving. I would like to know more reasons why the congregation, which is roughly about 2,000 to about 2,500, we don't have as many volunteers as we probably should with a congregation of that specific size. Again, I recommend that you review the strategic plan for greater detail that's not currently part of this presentation. Thank you again for listening and taking the time, and God bless.